Welcome to the Realm of Runes exclusive Patreon page, Boundaries and Wards. I'm Nasty Recon, and I'll be taking you through Boundaries and Wards. The first thing to understand with Boundaries and Wards is that they are not a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be different for everybody. One person is going to be comfortable with something that another is not, and vice versa. So keep that in mind as we talk about these, because they're going to vary based on experiences, experience level, pantheon, and comfortability. These will also differ based on the desired outcome of what it is we're doing, and boundaries and wards tend to be very purpose-driven. The purpose of what we're doing will dictate which boundaries and which wards are utilized and which ones are not. So what are we talking about here with boundaries? A boundary is a spiritual or personal hard stop, a line that is determined through your experiences, your comfortability after notions preconceived or otherwise are removed, that is used in your practice or every day to ensure your safety, comfortability, and ease, not only for yourself but those around you, for an event or your day-to-day, whether it's planned or not. The way we think of boundaries here is in two forms, active and reactive. Any practitioner worth their salt, pun intended, will tell you that boundaries are an ongoing engagement that takes experience and a lot of practice to get it right. There are layers built into these boundaries. Experienced practitioners will probably also tell you that it's very carefully thought out and methodical. You have to find that happy medium, another pun, because if you don't, then you are closed off to some things that you need to be open to, or you could be too open. It's very easy to over and or under boundary. The hardest part is getting it down to that fine-tuned area where everything is working the way it's supposed to. Before we get into defining active and reactive, it's important to understand the specificity, or being specific with our ask and our intent, is of the utmost importance here. We tend to establish intent without even realizing it, whether we're cooking, reading a bedtime story, or going throughout these encounters that we have in our day-to-day lives. These encounters can be positive or otherwise, but the specificity remains. Active boundaries. The act of, through specificity and experiences, to have set limits on who, what, where, and when energies, entities, and or actions can influence, appear, approach, or take place. Now, our active boundaries are up all the time, and we can change them out to fit the purpose and the intent of what it is we are doing. An active boundary for one thing may not work when I'm doing something else. Keep that in mind. Reactive boundaries. A reactive boundary is a secondary limit that is put into place that is reactionary in nature, just like the name says. These boundaries are called into service if an entity, energy, or action has usurped one of our wards or exploited a gap in one of our active boundaries, either by incompatibility or competition. Just like active boundaries, these must be well thought out, specific, and not hesitated on when called upon. And the situation will eventually occur where they are called upon. In between our active and reactive boundaries exist our wards. And just like we spoke about earlier, the people tend to do this without actually even thinking about it in their day-to-day, in their mundane. Some people may find it easier to implement boundaries in the liminal, which will most definitely translate over to the mundane, and vice versa. So keep that in mind. It's very important. Wards. Wards are our high-tech or low-tech security system. Think of objects or guides. These are all examples of wards. I'm just going to let you know what the wards are. I'm not going to totally go over them in any great detail, because here's the thing. Boundaries are a great building block for further undertakings when you start getting more experience and doing a thing. And after you strip away all of the stuff, all of the tools, all of the special magical items, what is left? The individual, their sovereignty, and their active and reactive boundaries. Another good example of a ward could be the Norse parts of the soul. Some of them we can absolutely use for our benefit or the benefit of another. I'm not going to crush that with any detail either, because that's going to be something that is talked about and spoken to you guys about in further videos. As with boundaries, it is extremely easy to over or under ward. How do we set these things, these active and reactive boundaries? I'll tell you. I want you to think of a couple of situations or events or scenarios in the mundane where you will not allow something to happen. Do you want to be bothered while you're pooping or in the shower? Things like that. Do you want to be woken out of your sleep in the middle of the night? Do you want your dreams affected? As you start to ask yourself more and more questions, you'll start to formulate what you will consider your boundaries. Some of them will be active and some of them will be reactive. Layer them, right? Think Shrek, as in like ogres are like onions, they have layers. That's how you want your boundaries to be, protective layers. I tend to stick with the mundane the most when formulating these questions because not a lot of people have experience within the liminal, which is totally fine. Think of all of these scenarios where you will not allow something to affect you. And remember, mundane translates over to liminal. Liminal translates over to mundane. Some other things to think about. Do you want to be touched? Do you want to be spoken to? Where and when? Do you have a space that is just for you? Because once you start doing some of this stuff, you will find things may try to make contact with you at all hours, in all places, in all spaces. So make sure you have a hard stop place where your sovereignty and your peace is protected. Once you do that, think of specific entities. This encompasses ancestors, nature spirits, and all branches and members of the seen and unseen population. So now you've established actions that you will not allow. You have established entities or energies that you will not allow. You've also established places and times. These are important. You are literally then going to write this all out and keep it as a record, because as you get more experienced and as you have more experiences, they may change. 2 years down the road, you may be way more comfortable with something than you are in this given moment. So hang on to it, and they will always change. This is a living document. Once you have all of these written down, what do you do now? Is writing them down enough? No. Now it is time to speak these into existence. What I'm going to go over is merely a blueprint for myself. You can choose to adapt, adopt, or change as you see fit for you in your practice. Now it is time to utilize your sovereignty. All right, you are going to be stern when you do this. Have some power behind the words and in the breath, or the und, Norse part of the soul plug, that you are going to utilize when invoking these. You are looking for any and all energies, entities, what have you, members of the seen and unseen population, to hear you and understand your specific, clear, concise, well thought out, well planned out, active and reactive boundaries. You can stomp your foot, or you can utilize a staff, stab it into the ground while invoking these. Should you choose to use a candle or incense, things like that, you may do so. But remember, the sovereignty and the self is all that is left. Nobody can do this for you. This is something that you have to do. Now, something that is utilized in a much different capacity than what we're going to be talking about here, but it translates over, is OODA loop. OODA loop stresses the importance of not moving any faster than your brain can process information, actions, events, intent, etc. And OODA is observe, orient, decide, and act. And you do this every single day without even realizing it. Much like putting boundaries in place. So maybe OODA loop will help you in deciding what boundaries to put in place and that purpose that goes behind what we do dictates the boundaries that we do put in place, so that OODA loop can kind of help. What are you going to be observing, orienting, and deciding and acting to? I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Message us. We're always going to be available and we'll respond. Thanks for being here. Blessings from Realm of Runes and Nasty Recon.